Good evening. This is Dr. Randy Bach. Today is November 10th, 2021, and I'm happy to be with here with you here tonight or whenever it is you're watching. Um, this is our 3 millionth 35 episode. Actually, not. We do this weekly. I started approximately about the same time last year. Um, and I've been doing these, knocking these out weekly, and you'd think you'd run out of topics, but I haven't yet. So there's always something new on the COVID scene. I can just tell you briefly in my own world, there have been some, I guess, COVID instances. It's a kind of a worldview um, fracture in a sense, like almost like a broken mirror. You know, people are looking at the world and seeing different things based on the angle they look at. So there's been some interesting interactions. I was at a supermarket the other day because I had a box to drop off for FedEx, and they have a FedEx stand in the supermarket. And it's a big place, 20-foot ceilings. It's pretty airy. It's like an indoor pavilion. People are not hot on each other, crowded and so forth. So I went up to the service area, and there was one other gentleman there, and I'm including myself as a gentleman. Maybe that's incorrect. And he's wearing a Harvard hat, kind of a high-end one with a nice filigree and a different pattern, not the usual. And he's about my age, wearing a mask, full form. And I just came in just to drop the package off. And all things considered, I'd rather not put a mask on. I find it rather pointless these days. And I think it perpetuates this kind of ethos and the myth of contagion, which is really not there. Massachusetts, where I am, goes about 0 deaths per day. It's about 10 million people in Massachusetts, so you'd expect within 300 or so deaths per day on a regular basis. Even when there are some logged, I guess they kind of do this weird statistical thing. They check them certain days, so one day it might be 25 or 46, but for the week it's very, very low overall. And maybe a couple, and they don't ever break it down by age. And I imagine it's in the older age group, which is kind of like part of being an older age group. So in this instance, I'm about to hand the package over, and the Harvard hat guy with the mask, pushes his cart right between us. He doesn't clip me or anything like that. But I could tell he just wanted to do that, keep the distance. And the mask wasn't enough for him, and he couldn't step back. He had to, visually show what a reprehensible human being I am. And so I guess I must have rolled my eyes. I mean, and he said, you can't roll your eyes, or don't roll your eyes, or whatever. And I was like, no, I think that's a thing that I will be doing. When it so happens, it's not really controllable. And then he harumphed, and he moved back, even further with his cart and everything like that. And I just walked out. I'm like, how's that Harvard education working out for you? And I forget what their logo is. I'm a Yaley, and ours was Lux et Veritas, light and truth. And I think the idea overall is to try to bring truth to light and bring light to truth. And that should be your imperative. It's not enough to, just learn the courses and get the degrees and become that thing that will get you the house in the suburbs and the whatever it is that accrues with that. I think there has to be continual investigation. If you're not willing to do that, you shouldn't really be having opinions. I suppose he's not, in a way. He's following other people's opinions. So there's just been a few instances. I belong to a congregation, and they went back to wearing masks on this big Delta scare, which I think was kind of an absurdity. I think it was in a way a power grab. There were more cases of the moment, but again, they were a distinction without a difference. There was no real big increase in illness overall, because most everyone was vaccinated here who is in and out and about, moving around amongst the adult mobile population. Those people who are vulnerable, a lot of them unfortunately passed away early on, and not a lot, but a certain fraction. And others are either sequestered or kept in the kind of focused protection realm of being masked and so forth. Anyway, our congregation has gone back to being mandatory for masks, and I think it's kind of a false god to obey Saint Anthony of Fauci, more than your own best interest. And the private space is a sanctuary. It's not a public space. I think you can do what you want to do. Whether that's what people want to do is another question, but I think that bravery is more commendable than cowardice. And thinking is more commendable. Critical thinking and actual logical thinking is more commendable than flow, or just get along, or not stand out and not be the nail that gets hammered down. So I'm kind of mystified and amazed that misinformation carries on so well. I have seen some patients recently, and they don't really we wound up talking about COVID incidentally. I haven't seen anybody lately for COVID symptoms, and nobody seems to have it. Everybody who comes in as an adult is vaccinated, it appears, and everyone's pretty much good with it. But there's varying levels of fear. I'd say that maybe 80%, 85% are really think it's a little bit of a facade, to keep carrying on as if there's a pandemic when there's not. There's not really that much going on. Nobody knows anybody who knows anybody who knows anybody who's really ill currently. They might have had some people in the past. Pretty much my cohort of friends and family, the only people we know who have passed are 90-year-old approximately, either parents or grandparents of friends or connections, and most of them had other illnesses, including severe dementia, stage 4 renal cancer, and whatnot. And that's not to say other people won't have problems, because there are some people who do, but they are vastly in the minority amongst the young and healthy, and certainly people under 50 years old. So this has always been, in a sense, a bimodal problem, and you have to decide where you are. I think there's a muddy zone for people who are, kind of late middle age and reasonably healthy, but concerned, nervous, and in a sense, watching the wrong, flow of information that kind of tickles our fear sensors, which are valid things to have. I mean, we, our hardware, our mental hardware is ancient, and all the things we come across, it's really kind of amazing. We can read and do internet and multitask and build computers and fly to the moon and all that kind of stuff, or up and around orbit. It's an incredible thing that we, amongst all the species on Earth, can do that, and we're probably the only ones who are fitted to think through these problems. I've got a wonderful dog, but he can't do this, and I see some squirrels and birds and whatnot, they can't, and snakes, and they all have their features and their I suppose their interests and their capabilities, and they can do certain things better than we can. Some of them can fly and whatnot on their own, but we're the only ones who can figure things out. So it's kind of amazing we do the things we do, but I suppose it's understandable that we have our limitations, that we really act on fear and we act tribally and so forth. So that's kind of a I guess where we are, in terms of being able to deal with a threat. I have just finished a book, Zika Remembered, it's called, on the last great pandemic, and I would love to share a copy with you. If you send me an email address, I'll give you an advance copy of the book, and I'd love to hear your comments and suggestions. I'm working on publishing schemes, whether to do self-publish or see if I can get a publisher to do it. And that doesn't mean I'm an expert on pandemics per se, but I'm an expert on Zika, the last great pandemic, but question mark, because it's disappeared. There was a fair amount of misinformation floating around with Zika, and it's still there. I mean, there are almost 1 billion. There are almost 1 billion women of reproductive age just in the tropics around the globe, and a fair number of them still, act in fear that one single mosquito bite the wrong time, and pretty much a year-round problem in the tropics, if you're outdoors, will ruin the cherished life within. And and for every one of these women of reproductive age, presumably there's a guy. And so we're talking about having couples go under extreme stress, to make sure that your queen bee, is protected. And this is an inordinate amount of work and energy, and worry. And I don't think that's, it's, we always talk about, playing certain, Mozart or whatever when you're pregnant, so the baby will hear the music, as it were, and you should be calm and so forth, because that's going to affect how your baby, sees the world or comes out or whatever. Who knows? But I think all things considered, it's better not to be under stress. Stress produces, certain cortisol differences in our hormone, our hormone pattern, and it's probably not a great thing. You don't sleep as well, you're not as well rested, so forth and so on. I just don't think it's a good health thing. These things have health ramifications. Zika, curtailed about 150,000 births from occurring in Brazil at the time around the pandemic. I'm not sure exactly how many since, but they're essentially non-births, non-lives, people who aren't there, and they're hard to see because they're not there. But this comes with a cost. So if you have one thing you're trying to fix, invariably there are other things that become unfixed. And if you look at, there's insurance people and certain I guess social researchers have a thing called QALY, which I think is quantity adjusted life years. So you may or may not notice much overall change in longevity from coronavirus, because people who are dying, the median age is around 80, 81, 82. And if you die at 80, say, 5 instead of at 85.5 or 86, it's not going to change. I mean, it's not going to add, I guess, lower the overall longevity on average as much as somebody dying at 35 from a heroin overdose. We've seen a huge spike in heroin overdoses and opioid overdoses in general in this last year. They went down vastly the previous 3.5 years or so during the Trump administration, because the economy was better. I don't think he had any, Mr. Trump had anything specific, really actionable for diminishing narcotic addiction, but it went down. So there are secondary effects. In this case, a secondary effect of doing something good, which is making the economy better, giving people jobs, hope. A lot of blue collar jobs return to the United States, middle America and whatnot, and a cut down on the, the methamphetamine epidemic, the opioid epidemic, and so forth. People had, more reason to live. COVID has done exactly the opposite. It's put a, world of hurt and a world of fear into the economy and people, respectively, and almost, disrespectively, I guess. And we're seeing the ramifications of this. I forget the exact number. I've had it on a previous episode, but I think it's about 40,000 excess. Now, in this case, you're talking about maybe 35, 40 years on average loss per person. So it's arguable that just this one side effect of COVID, the lockdown, so forth, the greater despair has been a higher cost in quality, quantity adjusted life years, the number of life person years lost, than COVID itself. And moreover, these are years lost in the heart of the living experience, when you're presumably working hardest and creating the most for others in society. Now, that's not to say that every opioid addict or overdose was in the highest level of production, but they could have been, and they were again mostly returning to regular life and work under the Trump years, because the numbers were going down gradually, very quietly, because good news couldn't be reported then, and bad news is not reported now. So you probably have not seen or heard about this. What else? Oh, in the news this week is Aaron Rodgers. He's Tom Brady notwithstanding, I think he's been the most accurate quarterback of the last 15 years. He's really a magician. Really bright guy. He won his Celebrity Jeopardy round, and he was in the running to be the host. I don't think that's going to be in the offing anytime soon, or after he retires. But he's still an excellent football player. He's in the talk for the MVP of the league. I think he might have been last year as well, and I think he might have won it last year. He won a Super Bowl. Anyway, all around interesting guy. His personal life is his own. I think he's had some, issues dealing with his brothers and his parents and so forth, and a bunch of different celebrity girlfriends and whatever. But overall, I think the guy is cerebral, very bright, and certainly he has a vision for picking apart defenses at on a par with Tom Brady, and both bright guys. So he lied. He said he was not immunized. He was, what's the word he used? I forget. It was a variant of immunized, not immunized. He had immunity. He said he had some, natural immunity, or whatever the words was, that implied that he had the vaccine, when in fact he meant that he had some homeopathic treatment. Now, if he's a bright guy, he probably realizes that homeopathic treatments don't really do anything. That's another story. But we'll give him, I don't know, benefit of the doubt or the unbenefit of the doubt, that either way. But I think he did it tongue in cheek somewhat, and he did it in service to a greater goal, which was not to have to, kind of pass through and do all the rather absurd, draconian um, uh, uh, tasks that the NFL and sports in general make you do in order to uh, stay um, uh, on the field. And not moreover, I mean, if you're not vaccinated, they make you stay in your hotel room on trips. They make you basically isolate. They make you stay away from the interpersonal um, uh, uh, team meetings and whatnot. And if he's the quarterback, he's pretty much the leader and the navigator of that team. When he's not on the field, the team is, what's the technical word? Sucks. They're no good. When he's on the team, they're a Super Bowl contender at the very least. And um, so for him to have missed those meetings because he was not vaccinated would have been a problem. So he did what he did, and the Packers are really, really good this year. They were horrible last week without him, and presumably they'll be good again when he's back. But he's getting a lot of opprobrium and disdain. I sometimes have sports radio clicked on. It's not as good since Jerry Callahan left the scene a few years ago, or was kicked out of the scene by kind of cancel culture irate mini contingent few percentages of listeners who are part of the Twitter crowd and the cancel advertisers. They make a kind of an Occupy um, um, propaganda foray against people they don't like. But anyway, I was listening to, I think it's Toucher and Rich on one of the stations, and I don't know if it was Fred Toucher, or if it was Rich, whatever his last name is. But it was just on and on and on about Aaron Rodgers, and back and forth. People couldn't even pronounce ivermectin, and so they're like, "Yeah, he's taking this dewormer, he's taking and I don't know. I can't even mispronounce as poorly as they did, and dude, if you want to like criticize Aaron Rodgers, like spend 5 minutes like learning what's the issue. And it's just it's a silliness. Everybody in the NBA and the NFL across the board who has had COVID, and I think most of them had the illness, a lot of them getting the vaccine, they're all back and up and running. This is like a zero differential for them. They're young, healthy men in elite physical status. So ipso facto, their cardiac status is all great. If not, it'll be uncovered for other reasons, and they'll be out for other reasons anyway. And I almost across the board, they don't smoke cigarettes because that is going to impede their financial and physical pathway to success. Anyway, so he's totally getting as it were destroyed, but he's getting destroyed in kind of a Gulliver's Travel Lilliputian kind of way. With a thousand tiny in this case, tiny minds, tiny souls are trying to tie down the giant. And I don't know if they're effective or not. I hope he just kind of, waves them all off. Similarly, Kyrie Irving, I think he's maintaining his, rather stoic stance against the vaccine. Doesn't want to do it. Doesn't think it's right for him. And he's right in this regard because I'm pretty sure he's already had the illness. He was out for the illness last year. And there's no real reason for this. And these guys don't get that sick. This is, as I've said before, there's a bimodal illness. So old people, beware. But even amongst old people, the oldest of people, if you're in a nursing home, 85-year-old, I think it's only 13% risk of death. Now that sounds, I don't know if that sounds high or not. That's one in, what is it? 13% is like 1 in 8. Or so, 1 in 7, in that range of nursing home people who contract this will die from it. Yes, okay, but nursing home, in I guess residents live on average about 13 to 15 months. So what is the we're talking about numbers that get inflated anyway because of the kind of monetary pathway towards overdiagnosis, and then we never really see the breakdown of who it is who's passing away, at least on a statistical basis. Anyway, I think I've said enough about all that stuff. Maybe just one other thing. I went to a business meeting recently, and it was at a local college. And the college, I hadn't been at this meeting for a while because a lot of them were on Zoom. And this most recent one, I showed up at the dinner hour by chance, and I don't like wearing masks when it's pointless to do so. And uh, so dinner, you can't wear masks, right? At this college, they have signs in certain areas where masks are optional if you're vaccinated, other places where masks are mandatory regardless. But this is a private meeting. We're renting out the space, and everyone's masked except during dinner. So that was a good time, chat and so forth. And I tried to extend the dinner a little bit by having, some grapes and little, finger food and whatnot. But at a certain point, that all ran out. And I saw there were, I guess I had emailed everybody earlier that I think that the masks at this point are an absurdity because people can stay at home and watch the Zoom if they want to. They don't have to come to the meeting, but if they're going to come to the meeting, I think you have to absorb some risk. Anyway, so that seemed to work as a rebel movement for a while, and then everybody, some of the people kept the masks on, and I think it kind of filtered through, and everyone remasked, and I felt uncomfortable. I don't want to ruin their gig, but I think at some point we have to figure out how this gets undone. And I see more and more people in the supermarkets and big box stores and whatnot not wearing masks. And I think you have to do it and wait and see what happens. I think, if one person stands up, the one person can be stopped. If everyone stands up, then that becomes the movement. It becomes the Tiananmen Square of our time, and you have to figure out what you want. I understand that Tiananmen Square ultimately was not successful, but it has its success and ramifications in better and different ways. Hong Kong has not been successful lately, but I don't think that's means if you're being taken over in Hong Kong that you shouldn't stand up. Obviously, it does, your results may vary. I am going to bring up a blog post that I enjoyed reading. This is by David Thunder, who's lecturer of political philosophy in Spain. And he's got a website, davidthunder.com, how the concept of misinformation has been weaponized to suppress dissenting viewpoints. I've experienced this myself in a sense. My Facebook page, Viral Conversation, we were getting a lot of hits. I was, hitting not enormous numbers, but 5,000, and some of the posts were higher than that, views for some of the videos, and it's been harder to break through. I think I've been algorithmed out of existence, and the posts that I choose to try to boost are not able to, and they want to put them through kind of a political channel instead of just general interest. They've cut down, I imagine, on my ability to gain new viewership. So please, if you see this and you choose to pass it around, I recommend reading this article. I'll send the link in the comments section. And the issue here, we're going to go through some of these. I'm not going to be able to read it all, but here's one example. Consider the following egregious case of misinformation on Twitter. The FDA tweeted out a picture of a horse and a statement associating ivermectin with horse medication to discredit claims that ivermectin, et cetera, could be repurposed. Both the FDA and Twitter know perfectly well that ivermectin is a drug with both human and veterinary uses. Yet that FDA tweet was not tagged or censored. And in contradistinction, I forget where it is in the article, but he points out that Martin Kulldorff was torn from Twitter for pointing out, here it is. Martin Kulldorff was censored by YouTube for suggesting that children did not need to be masked. Tweets that suggested that natural immunity could protect someone from against COVID-19 are tagged by Twitter as misleading, etc. I'm sure we've all come across this. These are true statements, though. Children do not need to be masked. They are not the super spreaders. They don't get sick. They are not nursing home residents. They can't be confused with them. You can't treat them like that. It's really a form of mild, but in a sense, child abuse to treat your children as if they are, I guess, lepers in a way, and they can't interact with each other. This is going to have huge ramifications. We see it with adults in the disease of despair, the heroin epidemic I mentioned already. We don't know what is going to, play out, or how it's going to play out for kids because no one's done this experiment, I think, ever before. So I'm going to just touch on a few articles about ivermectin. Some of these are from 2020. These are articles peer-reviewed, for instance, in Nature. Ivermectin, a systematic review from antiviral effects to COVID-19 complementary regime. So in the Journal of Antibiotics 2020. I imagine they started this beforehand. There are many, many different viruses for which ivermectin has had antiviral effects. So there's a list here from the same article, and it includes SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. The references are available: Zika, dengue, yellow Nile, chikungunya. So there's just a fair number of these. This is research precedes COVID-19 in most every instance, and there have been lots of articles. If you use the time filter, you can go back easily and see how well touted ivermectin was. And I believe it got, here it is, the 2015 Nobel Prize for Medicine recognizes the seminal contribution of Campbell and Murray in terms of the wonder drug ivermectin. It's a macrolytic lactone, da da da. And I'm not going to get into it, but the fact that it works on parasitic worm infections and ectoparasites causing scabies, which are like insect kind of things, mites and whatnot. The fact that it works on different things and apparently malaria, well, good, good. I mean, it may, there might be cellular mechanisms that are common to all these things. And viruses don't have cells per se, but they're using our cells. And who's to say that's not true? I mean, there seems to be a fair amount of data that it does something across the board. So why kind of throw it out, baby with the bathwater, because you don't like the concept, you don't like the idea. And so there's just a fair number of articles on this. And I just find it abhorrent that something that is potentially reasonable is treated so poorly. So the cut down of information is, news and newspapers are sometimes they're political in the essence of what they put out. So if it's a commentary, you can kind of get the political tint, but a lot of times what's missing of the political aspect for newspapers, CNN, TV and whatnot, is the things they choose to put in, the things they choose to put in, the things they choose to leave out. And you probably won't see anywhere that ivermectin is the wonder drug or the Nobel Prize and so forth. And you won't see other, anywhere, other kind of ways of handling and treating your health. I am a vaccine proponent. I am not anti-vax in any sense. It's an absurd term to begin with. Like I've said many times, I've given out probably tens of thousands of vaccines, and I've taken dozens of them myself, but I don't take every vaccine at any given moment for everything because I'm not really a candidate for all those things. I'm not at risk. I haven't had the yellow fever vaccine. I bet you haven't either, even though they exist, and or certain hepatitis vaccines and whatnot. It really depends on your situation and whether you need it and how well it's been tested. So I'm just going to kind of get back to some of the points here. Let's see if I can find some interesting things to talk about tonight. I might just graze over some of these, and I apologize. There's just a tweet from Jordan Peterson. This shouldn't be shocking. I was told, frankly and directly by an official at the highest levels in a Canadian government, that provincial COVID-19 policy was driven by polls, not science, not strategy, not an end goal. Polls. Travel restrictions, polls. The level of pusillanimity, which is cowardice, truly shocked me. I can't say it, but I know what it is. And him. I can't back this up. This is hearsay. It's double hearsay. But it's not incredibly hard to believe. We've seen hugely different responses across the board in our country, and those are political in a sense because maybe they're looking at the same thing. Maybe some of them are working on science, but clearly not everybody. If we were all working on science, I guess we would presume to see the same activity all across our country, and we haven't. So there has to be some political element going on. I'm going to kind of, jump a little bit here. I recommend reading Geert van den Bosch, who's a doctor of veterinary medicine and PhD. And he's got some articles, why COVID-19 vaccine mandates, why can't COVID-19 vaccine mandates be taken seriously? And he's got another one here. What happens if Israel fails the stress test? I haven't read through this one deeply, so I'm going to maybe pass on it tonight, but I recommend you go to his page, and I can give the links as necessary and look at some of the things he's talking about. His big point, which he's had out for a while, and I've covered here separately, is that this is the first time that a vaccine has been put out in the middle of an epidemic. You know, the flu shot every year is put out before that variant of the influenza is coming around, and most every other vaccine that we get is in a long-term prior in anticipation of potentially getting something, but not simultaneously with its being out in the public. And so I'm not going to, I can't really, this is obviously a dense article here, but his point is that um, uh, you are having a biologic strain. um, I'll give you the best example. Maybe I switch topics. We've heard about antibiotics given to animals. You know, when you give antibiotics to cattle over and over again, you wind up getting antibiotic resistant bacteria because the antibiotic's so widespread, the bacteria are just going to keep living. There's a lot of cows and a lot of bowels of the cows in which to live, and bacteria number in the hundreds of billions or whatever within your one's gut, cow's gut, and so some of them are going to be able to survive that antibiotic because there's a lot of variation when you have billions of cells and billions of replications and billions times billions. I mean, there's a lot of individual interactions there. The genome, some little mistake, and that's going to live on and be resistant. So that antibiotic's no longer going to work. The same thing happens. You basically get a drift in the population of the virus because the viruses that are going to be able to be passing around are the ones that are going to be able to survive the vaccine. So you're going to see a drift. And that's kind of, I think, partially the reason why we're doing all these booster shots, but we're kind of treating the wrong thing because the variants that are coming out are the ones that are resistant to the vaccination. So I think it's Einstein, probably, other people said this before, but, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Partially that's what's occurring right now. If there were to be a booster shot, it should be a booster shot with a different, chosen target protein. And that doesn't appear to be the case. I imagine that'd be hugely expensive, and then you'd have the whole nother job of trying to get it approved and whatnot. So they're doing what they're doing, but it's not full science. It shouldn't be mistaken for full science. It's full politics. And the rationales, maybe that's the best they can do right now, but it seems a little bit just like a kind of a pecking order kind of thing that you're going to get people to do this because you can get them to do it. So I'm going to bring back our little stream here and see what else I have on offer. I guess the stress tests he's talking about here is about giving these multiple boosters, talking about the third dose of mRNA vaccine. So he wrote this article in October, and I again, maybe a different episode, I'll go over this. I'll maybe look at the Israel results later on. But Israel has had 3 different waves. I don't think they've done well with all those boosters and vaccination. Overall, they haven't done much different from the Palestinian territories, which are sort of contiguous, same general climate, slightly different demographics and whatnot, but much less vaccinated. So if you just look at Israel, not so much against Israel, but against other countries in the region, they're not necessarily extraordinarily better off for having had the vaccine. Maybe in the future that will be the case, or maybe not. It might be the uncase if in fact there are issues from the vaccine itself, and we're not really convinced of that. So actually, let's see if I can find an issue. So this is somebody who it's a Dr. Mike Williams, who's a little skeptical about vaccines being put out in midstream, but for different reasons. He's talking about the article's called "Stabilizing the Code," and I imagine he's British because they spell the word differently. And this is from September. He talks about the vaccine, so forth. He brings up something which is a little bit out of my sweet spot, strike zone. He talks about toll-like receptors, which are proteins that work in the immune system. They play a key role in the innate immune system. They are, if you want to read along with me, they're single-pass membrane-spanning receptors. What happened with the vaccine? With the vaccine, basically there has to be kind of a shift. If this is a deck of cards, there are a few cards that are different in the mRNA vaccine that make it able to pass our own innate immune system. So the foreign mRNA is able to bypass part of the body's first line of defense, the innate immune system. So that we have kind of two basic parts, innate and specific. And so we've removed the code, and we can kind of get by these toll-like receptors, which are an alarm signal as they sound of the innate immune system. And I'm not going to be able to read this article with or for you per se, but he's pointing out that some things that are happening when people recently vaccinated might be because they've had some differentiation in part of their immune system. So these concerns, three concerns are raised by the above. The ability of the immune system to fight viruses has been diminished. Vaccine-induced innate immune tolerance may affect other vaccines. And finally, what other parts of the immune system may be affected? So these are questions without answers. He has a lot of incidental data, which are not specific. But in conclusion, which is further down, summary changes to key parts of the mRNA code may be causal in changing the innate immune responses via these toll-like receptors, et cetera, et cetera. I can't answer to any of these things. I'm not a research scientist. I don't have the data. But the question is, why this has to be done to people who have long-term life expectancy ahead of them. So I get it. My 90-year-old mother-in-law is in the basement, and we love her. I get it. She wants all the boosters she can get, and she just got her third booster, and God bless her. I hope she does very well with it. But she doesn't have any much of a long-term either way. So if there are long-term problems, she doesn't have a long-term. Your 9-year-old does have a long-term, long, long-term. And so if there are problems with this, his last point here is one might be forgiven for asking, surely someone must have cautioned against doing that. And why is it new drug vaccine products are supposed to be thoroughly tested before they're given to large populations? Well, they're supposed to be thoroughly tested because we don't know what the long-term consequences are. And if we're going to give them to people who have long-terms, we have to be sure of that. So again, kids have, really zero risk from the illness itself, and they have a lot of long-term. So why do this? It's being done for its own reasons. And, really, we can't specifically answer to that. I can't give you a full answer. But here's something from Facebook. If you have to be persuaded, reminded, pressured, lied to, incentivized, coerced, bullied, socially shamed, guilt-tripped, threatened, punished, and criminalized, if all of this is considered necessary to gain your compliance, you can be absolutely certain that what is being promoted is not in your best interest. So there are individual interests and there are societal interests. And you are a person, you're not a society. We all part of societies. But we have to figure out whether we're being, taught the right stuff. Public health is really all over this, vaccine, and they're spending a lot of time and effort on this. Frankly, I just put these up as a sidelight. I haven't proved this, gone about proving it, but here's an article, 2006, churchgoers live longer. I've heard this. I've seen some data that's relatively convincing, and he brings out some of the kind of touch points: regular physical exercise, therapeutic regimens, regular religious attendance. So these all have values. We are spending a lot of our kind of trust and, kind of like personal messaging ammunition. We're, shooting a lot with the vaccine, and we're trying to have kids do it. If we really want people to live longer, we could recommend regular religious attendance. We could recommend regular physical exercise, any of these, but potentially all of them. And there's another one over here, which is similar: health, marriage, and longer life for men. There's a lot of advantage to being married, and not everyone can be. Sometimes some of us been married and are no longer married. And some people, my mother-in-law, for instance, is widowed. She has no intention of being married. But there is an amazing increase in life expectancy for men who are married, probably women as well. I'm not positive because they live longer in general. But the difference is noted. But we don't hear anybody promoting marriage. We don't hear our public health institutions talking about marriage, about church attendance, about how these things help kind of regularize, normalize your life. We are being put into weird, odd situations where, in fact, we can't get exercise, we can't get church attendance. This is not helping young people date and mate, and get their longer life by marriage. So much has been put off through all these kind of absurd, draconian lockdowns and whatnot, that these, genuine things that would benefit your public health have been thrown aside. Along the way, getting back to some of the psychological things, there's an interesting article. I was happy to be pointed out. This is complicated, but the association of self-reported COVID-19 infection and SARS serology results with persistent physical symptoms amongst French adults during COVID-19. Okay, so awkward title. I don't like the way the title's phrased, but the point of this is that people who thought they had COVID had more in the way of long-term symptoms. And this is independent of whether they actually had it. So we hear a lot about long COVID, but it may be ultimately that it tracks with fibromyalgia. It used to be Epstein-Barr virus. I don't remember this. That was like, that's the one that causes mononucleosis. People felt they had chronic mono. And nobody really knows what causes fibromyalgia. I personally think it's part of despair and depression, and what in large part, don't argue with me, but go have it fixed however you like. But in my experience, antidepressants have vastly helped. Maybe that's coincidental. But the fact of the matter is that there are going to be people with long COVID because people incentivize and self-incentivize in various ways. There have been huge incentives for people to stay home, and people stay home. The unemployment rate was very high, and it's slightly dipped recently. And everyone's like, oh, the economy's getting better. But in large part, it was because the unemployment benefits disappeared. And people had to go back to work. People go back to work when they have to. All things considered, our default position right now, I'm staring at my lovely canine friend. He's wants to run around now and then, but most of the time he'd rather just lie down because that's easier, and we feed him and so forth. And I'm not saying he's not a layabout. I'm sure in the wild he'd be acting differently, but he does it because he can. He's not under any real environmental pressure to do anything but lie down and relax. And that's what a lot of people would rather do. It's easier, it's more fun. You can watch Netflix and so forth. And so when people have the kind of misery, and they think they have something, then they kind of catch on. A lot of people are getting more sympathy for having long COVID. I think this works in our psyche, and whether it's just the misery of being miserable makes you miserable, or whether there's some secondary benefit, you wind up having I don't know, a disability check and stuff like that. It's an interesting study, and I can leave the link for anybody who wants to see that as well. What else do we have? So I'm going to be wrapping up shortly. I want to touch on this. Well, this is really kind of a little esoteric and off topic for us, but I liked reading it. Sometimes the studies you see show big differences, and then those differences disappear when you look more closely. So here's an example. After COVID-19, a little risk of catching COVID-19, and they're showing with the people who had placebo, they thought they got a shot, but they didn't, is much higher than the people who had the vaccine. So these people did much, much better. But if you look closely, it's not that much of a difference, and their relative health may not even change that much. If you do it in a certain population, these it's catching COVID, but it's not getting sick from COVID. And if you look on an absolute scale, the differences are actually tiny, because this placebo group had 2% chance of catching COVID, which is bigger than this, but it may not, it's not that big overall. So there, how you look at statistics really vary. So in this case, they're talking about, relative risk versus absolute risk reduction. So it's kind of a thing where you should look carefully. So some of the things going on around the world. In the UK, they want the over 65s without boosters now to be banned from public spaces. This is really draconian and absurd, and it's what's the word? Tyrannical is the word I would look to use. And it's just one thing or another. This is the health minister of the UK. He's got his UN climate change mask. He knows he doesn't probably need to wear a mask. I'm sure this guy is as boosted up as all, get all, but he's doing this. And this, this is other ways that when the COVID's done, they're going to be using this to kind of control your lives. Because why? Because they, kind of get a kick out of it. Who knows? I'm probably going to close with that, or I don't know if I can think of a few other things to have. There's some statistics around the world we can look at, but maybe I'll save that for another episode. I've gone on 45 minutes already. This is a bit of maybe good news. remdesivir is not doing that well. It's supposedly a COVID medication. So there are COVID medications, but these are like the ones approved. Ivermectin would be inexpensive. This wouldn't be very expensive. It looks like the parent prodrug does have some use in ferrets, in animals. So let's, I guess I did not have those added to the stream, so I'll just show these very briefly. So this is the Health Minister one, over 65 without COVID boosters, and I'm not sure with, I guess I left out this chart, so I apologize. This was the chart showing a big risk, relative risk of catching COVID, but when you look at the absolute numbers, it's really not that much differential. So I think that might do it for tonight. I appreciate your time and patience, and yes, we're glad it wasn't a Princeton guy with a Harvard hat, but I'm in the wrong neck of the woods, I guess. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and if you can, please share this, and I hope to see you soon.